I would say 6 months before I got here, I'd never heard of the place. But my husband and I were getting to the point of retiring. He had found a couple of places out on rivers and whatever so he could go fishing. And I said, well, just dump me at the insane asylum because I can't do that. I want a town. And so we were talking about it at my sister's, and one of her friends said, sounds to me, Holly, you're an artist. It sounds to me like you want Chestertown. And I said, okay. So we came back from the beach and drove through, and I looked at the place, and I was like in love. I just was amazed at how beautiful and charming, and just, I thought it was fabulous. I did that. I loved teaching. That was my bestest fun thing. Just wonderful. I ended up, I did 5th, 6th, a little bit of 7th, and then got into 8th grade. I started out because of my geology. I started out as the science and math teacher. But Montgomery County, in its infinite wisdom, decided that somebody who had been an English major would do better in science. And so I got moved over to history. Loved it. Absolutely loved it. Taught 8th graders for a number of years in a school that we had so much diversity. I think when we had International Night, we had more than 50 flags sitting on the table. And some of them had money in the family, and some of them were basically homeless. So it was the full economic gamut. And I just thought the 8th graders were so much fun. I know that's a little weird. There are people who think she's crazy, but I just thought the 8th graders were so much fun. So that's what I retired from eventually. Even before we formally moved in, I became, because one of my hobbies has been art, I joined the Art League and met fabulous people and realized that Barbara Vann had put together, the Art League was hitting a slump, and Barbara Vann pulled it out of the fire. She just really made it hum. But by the time her tenure had finished, we still didn't have active committees and that kind of stuff. Well, if you're a teacher and a manager and whatever, you do committees. So I was president for 2 years and put committees together and got some organization into the pile. Just almost immediately after that, between the DCA and meeting Margot, she put me on Main Street and she said, you should be the president. Okay. So we did Main Street for a year. And that was very much a learning experience because you find that there are resources available to towns that private citizens really can't get. And so you need to go through the town, you need to have Main Street or some equivalent for the economic growth. But 1 year was plenty. And then I retired from that. As president of Main Street, I started going to the town meetings. And I got to tell everybody here, that's better entertainment than anything that's on TV on Monday nights. I highly suggest that somebody just take a gander at this, because it really is, there are some very fun and funny moments in the town meetings, and some very serious business attended to. So what I got from Main Street, plus beginning to attend the meetings, sort of pulled in my interest. Well, I started out with two. One was economic growth, an understanding of economics, having run businessy sort of things and been involved in. That economic growth was something that you had to seek. It wasn't just something that was going to fall in our laps. And so that was one, and I'll come back to the kind of underpoints for it. The second one was, I live on Queen Street. Half the houses on Queen Street are either dead empty or only have people who are there on weekends or whatever. And so the sense of neighborhood it's very hard to develop on that way. And I don't, I looked at downtown, and it needs vitality. Well, you don't get it if everybody lives out of town. You need to have some people in town. And there are some problems with living in town that can be addressed. The third thing was that as I went to more and more meetings, it wasn't originally on my list, but I put on that the town needs to do more complete planning for its various projects. One of the things that's a problem is that all those apartments above the stores, you can't put a family in there. You can't put a family with children in those because they have lead-based paint. Main Street and the National Trust and the State Trust have the ability to at least support the renovation that's necessary. But again, the town has to be involved. So that's one space where, you look at the number of places. Demolition by neglect is not permitted in this town. And yet there are places in the historic district that are clearly going to fall in on themselves. One of the spaces, and this became an issue a few years ago, was Park Row. The National Trust language and the state and our own historic district language in the ordinances says a building should be used as it was originally designed, if at all possible. So here you have Park Row, which is residential. And yet the zoning gets in the way of it being used as a residence. Now, we have empty stores, so why do we need to dictate that those should be shops? We have empty offices, so why do we need to dictate that those should be offices? And I know one person who lives on that block who had, trying to sell it for their retirement fund, had 2 full offers. They asked for a certain price, they were offered the full amount if they could have a variance and live on the bottom floor. And the answer was no. So these people are tying up their retirement fund because they want to use the building as it was originally designed, which should be the goal of the town. Right now, the town is somewhat depending on tourism. But before it can be a tourist venue, it needs to be a functioning town. It needs to have, say tourism dries up tomorrow. That makes this like a company town where they're not making steel there anymore or whatever. You have to have a broader base in your economics. And right now, Lamont and Dixon Valve are the only 2 broader base things besides the shops. So you can't think of the economy just as shops and tourism. You have to think of it in other broader ways. And I know that there are small internet companies that would locate here if we had the infrastructure. The old build it and they will come. My son had a small company that he was running. They made ringtones. And as the population in that company began to get married and have kids, they were looking for some place that they might raise those kids. And my son's response was, but Mom, you don't have the infrastructure. We can't upload and download what we need fast enough, efficiently enough to be able to do our business. So we couldn't possibly, no matter how lovely Chestertown is. Now, I read in the paper yesterday in the Baltimore Sun that they're talking about these trunk lines. Right now, internet goes basically to government. So it can come to the town office, it can come to schools, but there's nothing, they don't get enough at this in Kent County to allow them to be a hub for outlying families and businesses. We need that. We very, very much need that. You have to look at a diversity of businesses, not just for the economic prosperity of the town, but what are all those kids coming out of high school going to do? They're not all going to work in shops or at Dixon Valve. They're going to have something to do if we're going to retain the best and the brightest. So we need to explore those other avenues. My platform basically is exactly what Margot said in her speech that says she was leaving. She was there for a number of years, and things kind of got into a rut. People got used to a certain way of doing it. We need to review those, top to bottom. We need to look at parking, zoning, signs, collaboration, not just with the college and the other organizations, Sultana and that kind of thing, but collaboration and cooperation with the everyday citizen. There's a lot of talent in Chestertown that's not being organized to be useful. There are a lot of voices in Chestertown that frankly I don't think are being heard. So all of that needs to be reviewed.